gentlemen, welcome to the Walter and Eliza Hall Institute, where today we're at an Ovarian Cancer Australia consumer forum. Women from across Australia and their families have sent in questions about all aspects of ovarian cancer, and we have a number of people who work at the highest level who are answering the questions that you've sent. And so thank you for joining us here at the Walter and Eliza Hall Institute. My guest is Professor David Bowtell. He's the head of Cancer Genomics and Genetics Program at the Peter MacCallum Cancer Centre. Just as we begin, in a nutshell, what's your work and do you see patients?
No, I don't see patients. I'm not a clinician. I'm a molecular biologist, and so I'm interested in trying to pull apart the biology of ovarian cancer and really understand what makes it tick.
What causes ovarian cancer?
Well, I think the first thing to say is that ovarian cancer is not one disease. So, this is almost a mantra these days, that ovarian cancer is a collection of diseases that share an anatomical location in the body. And so because they're different diseases, they have different causes. So the biggest one, the most important one, most important one in terms of causing deaths in women is high-grade serous ovarian cancer. And that one has, at least in a proportion of patients, a strong genetic association. So there are certain genes that increase the risk of developing that type of ovarian cancer.
Okay. We've been asked, why did I get it?
I think that all diseases, not just cancer, but cardiovascular disease, diabetes, dementia, and so on, they're all an intersection between our genes and the environment. It's neither one thing nor the other. And so, for example, if you've got terrific genes, then you can probably smoke till you're 80 and never develop cancer. But if you've got genes that are not so great, then you're likely to develop lung cancer. And so probably the same is true in the case of ovarian cancer, that there's this intersection between lifestyle factors, which in the case of ovarian cancer are not particularly strong, but are there, and we know some of them, and genetic factors. So there are certain things that are protective that actually prevent the development of ovarian cancer. So one of the lucky outcomes is that the oral contraceptive pill actually reduces the rate of ovarian cancer. Conversely, the number of times that a woman ovulates increases the number. So the more cycles, the more that there's a risk of developing ovarian cancer. Not really a lifestyle factor, but endometriosis, which is very common in a small proportion of women, can go on to develop into certain types of ovarian cancer, clear cell ovarian cancer, for example.
You mentioned it's not all one cancer, it's different cancers at a common site in the body. How will that insight help treatment and recovery?
Yeah, so this has been one of the kind of revelations. Sorry. It's been really one of the revelations for the field, that for a very long time we've considered this to be a sort of a single disease, and now we really understand that it's multiple distinct diseases that have different origins. They come from different cells, they have very different biologies, and that really explains in large part why they have different responses to chemotherapy. So for example, clear cell cancers for a long time have been regarded as platinum resistant. So platinum is a mainstay of treatment. But really the reason that they're resistant to platinum is that they don't have the properties of these high-grade serous cancer cells that make them very sensitive to treatment. And so by understanding their different diseases, it goes quite a long way to explaining why there are these different responses to drugs. And it really drives the need for using drugs that are more specific in terms of the types of ovarian cancer. So that's one thing. Another thing is that from a biological point of view, that when we try to find genes that are associated with good survival or poor survival, if we treat ovarian cancer as a single disease, we just can't see that in the data. But when you break it down into individual groups, then you can start to see those associations and you can start to pick apart the biology, as I said. Another really important thing is that we've now understand, so for a long time it was thought that BRCA mutations were in 5 to 10% of women with ovarian cancer. And that was ovarian cancer as a collective. But our work, and now work from overseas as well, has shown that that risk or those genes, those mutations, are really associated with one type of ovarian cancer, and women that have other types of ovarian cancer are not really at risk of carrying those mutations.
I'm acutely aware that we have some women in the room who are very recently diagnosed, and so they're hearing all this and learning about it for the first time. And I want to again emphasise that Ovarian Cancer Australia have a lot of material on their website and referral to other good websites where you can read what we're talking about. But I just want to ask a few more questions about genetics. We will have another speaker later. What is the purpose of genetic testing? Who should get it, and how does it help?
Right. Okay, so when we talk about genetics and ovarian cancer, we're really, in the first place, talking about BRCA1 and BRCA2, and as I'll come to in a moment, some other genes. So I'm not sure how much background you've had about those genes. Probably some of you will be very familiar with it, and others less so. So a gene is basically a blueprint. It's an instruction for a cell how to make a part. Just in the same way that a workshop might have the instructions for making a piece of machinery or a cog or something like that. A gene is enough information to make one of these parts, and that part is a protein. Protein's the sort of the functional element in the cell. And the BRCA1 and BRCA2 genes are genes that encode those two proteins, and they're part of a complex, tiny machine. You can't even see it, but it is a machine that can repair DNA with great fidelity. And if there's a mistake in that instruction code, then the cell's ability, a woman's cell's ability to repair those mistakes in DNA is compromised, and that's why she goes on to develop ovarian cancer. So the reason I'm sort of emphasizing this a little is that we now understand that those two genes are actually part of quite a complex machine with a number of different parts in it. And so, they turn out to be particularly important parts of the machine, but there are other genes that encode other parts of the machine that, when mutated, can also increase the risk of developing ovarian cancer. And that's kind of where the field is at the moment, in having known about these two components, BRCA1 and BRCA2, for a long time, but now starting to appreciate the importance of these other components and trying to factor those into measuring genetic risk. So any woman with high-grade serous ovarian cancer should be offered genetic testing, and in fact our work changed the genetic testing guidelines in Australia. So that testing is now accessible and is paid for through Medicare, and anyone that has that particular type of cancer, and that's around about 70% of the serious types of ovarian cancer, so that should be offered testing, basically.
So basically, if you were here, you'd ask your medical oncologist, should I have a genetic test?
Right, that's right. And they can guide you through it, because there are certain types of ovarian cancer where it's just they're not associated with those mutations, and so they might not need them. But then for the others, they would.
Now, what about my family, my sisters, my mother, my daughter? What is the advice there?
Right, so if a woman is carrying one of those mutations, then that woman's daughter would have a 50% chance of inheriting the mutation. And it's important to know that, because there are things that can be done to really reduce the woman's risk of developing not just ovarian cancer, but also breast cancer. And so, one of the things that we're very actively pursuing at the moment is trying to fill in the gap of the women who missed out on the change in the guidelines. It's a study that we're just starting called Traceback. And we think that if we can find those women and then find the carriers in the families, we could probably prevent about 2,500 breast cancers and about 1,000 ovarian cancers in this study.
Okay. Yeah, that's right. Give a clap for research and the funding of it. Obviously, I could ask more questions. I'm going to leave that now. We have another genetics person later. And of course, you can ask more questions as well when we come to question time. But for those of us with us on the internet, it's my great pleasure to have with me Professor David Bowtell, who's the head of Cancer Genomics and Genetics Program at the Peter MacCallum Cancer Centre in Melbourne. I want to come, if I may, to OPAL, the Ovarian Cancer Prognosis and Lifestyle Research. What's that all about and how can it help women?
Okay, so this is a study that's run by Penny Webb. So Penny was one of the chief investigators on the Australian Ovarian Cancer Study, which is the study I've led since 2001. And so OPAL is a study to try and understand the impact of lifestyle factors on the development of ovarian cancer, and also to understand how women with ovarian cancer, how lifestyle might influence the way they experience the disease and how they survive the disease. And it's one of the things that women want to know is if they've got ovarian cancer, what can they do in terms of their lifestyle that might modify their risk of developing the disease. It's, I should mention here MOCOG, which probably isn't in your notes.
MOCOG?
MOCOG. So MOCOG is somewhat...
Oh, what does it stand for? What is it?
So it's a multidisciplinary ovarian cancer outcomes group. So it's a bit of a mouthful, but basically it's an international consortium, and what MOCOG is really interested in is women who have had an exceptional response to treatment or a long-term survival, who have survived the disease much longer than we would have expected given their stage of disease and the type of cancer that they have. So this again is focused on those high-grade serous ovarian cancers, and it's an international consortium, and we're very interested in these women who beat the odds. And so this is now funded through a large United States program grant. Here in Australia in our lab, we're the lead on the genomics part of that. At Memorial Sloan Kettering in New York, they're leading, and University of Michigan, they're leading on lifestyle. Yes. So rather like an OPAL will be part of that. And then at University of British Columbia in Canada, they're leading on looking at immune response to the cancer.
And could I ask you, because obviously it's an ongoing study, but are there any early lessons from it that we could share with our audience today, many of whom have got a diagnosis right now?
Not yet from the study. So the study actually starts September 1 of this year. So the funding of it starts. We've been in pilot phase, and the pilot phase has been creating the consortium and bringing all the different investigators in different countries together. And so the lifestyle part of that will really only start to gain information over the next couple of years. On the molecular side though, we've already been working on it. And so we've got some clues about how different mutations in the cancer can interact actually with BRCA1 to make the cancer exquisitely sensitive to chemotherapy, like much more than what normally occurs. And we think that that may be useful in terms of, in more typical cases, in changing the drug combinations and make them be able to attack the cancer much more successfully.
I love the language, exquisitely sensitive. I assume it means it works real good.
It works really well. I mean, these are amazing patients who have not been cured surgically. They, unfortunately, in quite a significant proportion of women, there's still some cancer present macroscopically, visibly after the surgery. There's just so much of it, and it's so distributed it can't be removed. And so we were very interested in women who had quite bulky residual disease after surgery, but then had this incredible response to chemotherapy, and it stayed down for many, many years. And in some women, they appear to have been cured.
We just have a few moments left on our film before we finish this segment of our interview. And I want to ask you two things, if I may. One is, are there any new treatments in the pipeline that may be of benefit to the people in this room?
Yeah, look, I should mention there's lots of acronyms. So I'll mention another one, and it's called OASIS, and it's just getting underway. In fact, we're just considering the first round of it. So OASIS is a new initiative that I and a few other people got off the ground, which is to really accelerate things coming out of the lab and into the clinic. So instead of waiting 2 or 3 or 4 years to get grant funding, OASIS can give us funding for pilot projects, clinical trials in patients within the order of 6 months of putting in an application. So the idea, so there are 4 studies that have been submitted to OASIS. We're reviewing them this week. For confidentiality reasons, I can't go into those, but OASIS is a really good initiative to really drive things out of the lab and into the clinic quite fast. I know Claire, I came in just towards the end of Claire's talk, she was talking about PARP inhibitors. There's immuno-oncology trials that we're commencing. So we're commencing a combination PARP and immune checkpoint inhibitor trial that will start probably around September this year. Mm-hmm. So there's actually quite a lot happening, but I think OASIS is a really interesting initiative because it sort of, we're trying to speed up the process. You know, for someone who has cancer, hearing that, you know, a trial might be 2 or 3 or 5 years away, I mean, we've had enough of that, right? Yeah. And so we really need to move this stuff much faster out of the lab and into the clinic.
And just finally and quickly, how long can a woman go on being treated? A lot of women have asked that question from across Australia. How long can I go on being treated?
Well, as I say, I'm not a clinician, but you know, in the Australian Ovarian Cancer Study, which I head up, we've had women who have had 8 lines of chemotherapy, 9 lines of chemotherapy. So, you know, each line is you know, sort of 6 cycles of platinum and taxane, for example. And so there are some patients who are treated for a very long time. The other thing that we know of are patients who have stayed on a drug like I was talking to Michael Friedlander the other day. He's had a patient who's been on Calyx for just continuously for the last 3 years.
Okay. Well, look, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to thank Professor David Bowtell. Thank you. And for those of you watching, David is the head of Cancer Genomics and Genetics program at the Peter MacCallum Cancer Centre here in Melbourne. And if you'd like to learn more information about what you've been hearing, or indeed to see this film again, go to the Ovarian Cancer Australia website. They have numbers there where you can ring Ovarian Cancer Australia and talk to people about all we've been discussing and much more. So ladies and gentlemen, please thank Professor David Bowtell.